Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Where Sustain webinar on ethics and sustainability. My name is Lucy Bonnell, and I'm a research manager for Where at the University of Creative Arts. Thank you all so much for joining us. This webinar is for current teams and for new applicants, and we hope we'll address some of the critical issues facing teams trying to address the Where core themes of sustainability and ethics. First of all, we're going to hear from Martin Charter. Martin is Director of the Centre for Sustainable Design and Professor at the University of Creative Arts. Martin's going to speak about sustainable development and product lifecycle issues for the creative industries and product design. Then we're going to hear from Prahl, who's an independent design professional with over 20 years of experience in the sports and fashion industry. Anne's going to share insights on lifecycle analysis, concerns and approaches for designing and developing wearables and e-textiles. Then we're going to have a Q&A session for both Martin and Anne. And then we're going to hear from Susan Kuzel, who is Professor at the School of Arts and Culture in Malmö University. And Susan's going to lead us on data ethics and collection for wearables. Also, as you know, during the webinar, there's a chance to ask questions, and my colleague Rachel and Johnny and I were all on the call, and we'll try and answer those questions where possible as we go along, and other ones we can address to the speakers at the Q&A times. Then at the very end, we'll have a Q&A session if there are any other questions left. So, Martin, are you ready to begin?
Yes. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So, shall I start?
Please.
Yes. Okay. So, thank you very much. Where's Sustain team? So, in about 10 minutes, I'm just going to quickly give an overview of a series of issues around product sustainability. So at a very high level, we have now the Sustainable Development Goals that were launched about 2 years ago, 17 goals, really recalibrating the Sustainable Development Agenda running up to 2030. Within that, particularly responsible consumption and production of Goal 12 really focuses on a lot of these issues that we're tackling. However, this is very high level, yet governments and a number of companies are really taking the goals on board. So products are important. 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined at the design stage. So if you're not thinking about integrating environmental considerations when you're designing or developing your products, you're potentially embedding problems. There are many terms around the world that are used to essentially discuss the integration of environmental considerations into product design and development. You know, increasingly green design in China, eco-design in Europe, environmentally conscious design in Japan, design for environment in the US. We even have, you know, standards within the international standards organizations using different terminology. But the key thing is, what are we talking about? And I'll come back to that in a minute. In a broader sense, we have sustainable design, and this is really looking at how we integrate environmental, social, and economic issues into design and development of products and increasingly services. However, this holistic perspective, despite people talking about it for many years, decades even now, is not so evolved. The integration of the social component is not evolved. So what most people are doing is, in effect, eco-design. And eco-design, this is a bit of a sort of technical type of definition, but perhaps it explains it. I'll just go through very quickly. So eco-design is the systematic identification and consideration of environmental aspects within product design and development in order to reduce adverse environmental impacts and improve the performance of the product throughout the whole life cycle. So we've got environmental performance, we've got life cycle, are key points in this. And traditionally, we're looking at how we reduce the environmental impacts across the traditional life cycle, from extraction through to disposal and all the stages in between. And really, as designers, we need to be thinking in those life cycle perspectives about how we reduce materials, energy, water consumption, for example, and how we add value. So at each of those stages, for example, looking at materials, could we use less materials? Could we use different types of materials with lower embedded carbon, for example? Some very simple tools here to think about this is to look at the life cycle stages and look at your different environmental aspects and think about, you know, where these issues impact. Traditionally, with a lot of electronics products, the biggest environmental impact is energy consumption in the use phase, for example. So how do these elements hook together? So from a high level, if we're looking to reduce global warming or climate change, we can look at, for example, the energy consumption of our products. And within our design processes, what are the sort of things that we can do? We can look at to reduce energy consumption. Well, we can look at the power supply and consumption and efficiency of that, the fuel consumption. We can look at what types of materials are we using. Are we using, you know, high embedded carbon materials or renewable materials, and, you know, the weight and volume of the product. So by reversing this and looking at those design parameters, we can actually, you know, reduce energy consumption and potentially impact on climate change. We have a whole range of strategies that are available to us that we can think about, you know, at each stage of the life cycle. I haven't got time to go into this, but, you know, there are a whole range of strategies and thoughts that you know, designers and developers can go through to reduce that impact at each stage. However, what we have at present really emerging in the early 2010s is an ongoing discussion that is further evolving around, you know, this idea of moving from the traditional linear economy, you know, the life cycle as I presented it before, from extraction, you know, from take, make, and dispose, to the linear economy, where we're circulating those materials much more efficiently within the system. My own personal position is that circular economy is part of a broader sustainability approach, and it's a lot more about how we keep the value of products in the system for time. So circularity, you know, can be thought about in two senses. How do we design products that maybe have a biological, you know, input to retain within the biological system, and then technical products like plastics, metals, or even mixed materials, how can we extend the life of those products? So a key element, particularly in the technical cycle, is thinking about the extended life cycle perspective. How can we design for maintenance? How can we design for repair? How can we design for refurbishment and upgrading, and even remanufacturing? And if we can't do that, can we extract the components or spare parts and reutilize them? And then materials recycling is really much further down the line than we originally thought, and landfill, of course, even further. So we have some companies like Philips who are starting, and others who are starting to bring this, you know, these cascades into their own. They have the 6 focal areas of eco-design, and they've now brought in circularity into their 6 focal areas. So looking at servicing, refurbishment, etc. And just in closing, you know, so within many wearable technologies, obviously it's an evolving area. We've got from the medical side right through to, you know, almost, I don't know the technical term, but headset related wearables, right through to textiles. So in terms of things like Google Glass, you know, how do we design this to be, you know, to be have a product life cycle extension? So how can we design it for ease of repair? Could we design it for modularity, so that if some elements fail, that we don't have to throw it away, we can upgrade it or remanufacture it? We get into other very complex areas with a number of wearables, where we're including a lot of sensor and small microelectronics. So, you know, we have this potential for a lot of short life products that really are creating a lot of problems at the end of life. At the moment, wearables, and Anne may be able to correct me on this, are not a category that is falling within the WE directive, but with the proliferation of electronics into wearables, I assume that the European Commission and other related, you know, national bodies will start to look at it in relation to their equivalent for their WE directives. So again, you know, could we design a backpack to separate the cells from the textiles rather than having a huge problem at the end of life where we've got these mixed materials? What we do in terms of you know, things like these gonks, you know, can we you know, design it to be flexible, to change the eyes if they're broken, etc., etc. You know, again with art stroke concept work, how can we design the products to make those electronics easier to separate? And you know, Christmas hats, Father Christmas hats, you know, again, same sort of process. So again, you know, the millennials are really picking up on technology, so inevitably, you know, technology is going to integrate further and further into a whole range of different products, including, you know, clothing, textiles. We really need to start to think about how we design in for product life extension, or else we're going to have huge growing problems of these, you know, small life products going either, well, going practically to landfill. So thank you very much. I hope there was some interesting points there.
Thank you very much, Martin. That's great. Anne, are you available to start now?
Yes, I'm here. So
Great.
just hand over, I think.
Thank you.
So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Oops. I think I've clicked on to the next page already. So I'm just going to go a little bit more into detail. I completed a PhD in 2016, and this was really about finding more sustainable design approaches for textile-based wearable technology. And over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to look at some of the challenges, but also the opportunities that designing wearable tech brings. So for me, the starting point is really, you know, the most frustrating thing about wearable tech is the amount of pointless products that really, you know, have just been designed because they can be designed. And a really good image is that of the circulator on the left, image number 1 by Lucy Dunn, because she pointed out that we can't just simply stick a technology onto a piece of clothing and expect it to be a wearable technology. So it's just, you know, there's a lot of pointless products out there. And also the school blazer that you see in the middle, I mean, this was a school blazer, a school uniform with iPod control. And this obviously caused a lot of distraction in the classroom. So they had to actually ban it in schools. So it's really important to think about, you know, what is the real user need? And there's a lot of wearable techs that actually improve wearers' lives and help them with chronic diseases, like, for example, the image on the right, the artificial pancreas system for diabetes sufferers. So that's just, you know, my starting point to wearable tech is it can't be sustainable unless you think of a real user need and really fulfill something and improve people's lives. So then looking at challenges around manufacturing, it's really, you know, looking at the non-renewable resource consumption and depletion that's happening in textiles. We're using a lot of oil-based materials such as polyester, and that's really not the way forward. We need to start using materials that are renewable, and there's a lot of great new materials coming through. But also, if we're looking at wearable tech, we obviously have electronic and conductive components such as precious metals. So there's silver, copper, and gold involved. And if you look at the image on the left, I mean, this really shows we also need to consider the conditions that men, women, and children have to endure to actually harvest these precious minerals that we're utilizing, you know, in our wearable tech. Also, another issue is the hazardous and toxic substances that are utilized even just in the textile industry. And we're already struggling in textile manufacture with all in the denim industry, for example, with how we're creating bleach and colors and you know, printing. There's a lot of chemicals involved, and this is really harmful for the people actually making the garments. And obviously that's just in the textile industry, but if we're looking at wearable tech, there's a whole load of other components that could emit hazardous chemicals during the manufacture. So we really need to think about the conditions of the workers. And if we're looking at end-use issues, this really concerns what happens to the wearer, any potential health implications when we're using wearable technology. And this could range from things like electromagnetic radiation exposure, but also body and skin being really close to batteries. You know, how does that affect our health? Also, there's been some research into the psychological effects on our well-being of actually being constantly connected. And the image on the right just shows this whole thing about distraction. You know, people just stare at their mobile phones all day and they don't really know what's going on around them. And the research has shown that we're already addicted to data, we're distracted, we're irritable, there's far more anxiety around, and also our attention spans have, you know, gone, they're very low these days. And the whole thing about information overload, we're constantly bombarded with information. So if we're starting to wear wearable tech, you know, how will this actually affect our sanity and our well-being? And the most prominent, sort of the biggest and most obvious issue, and Martin already sort of talked about this a little bit, is really what happens at end of life. And the image here really shows, the three images here illustrate that. On the left, we're already struggling with electronic waste. In the middle, we're already struggling with textile waste and don't know where to put it. But if we're merging electronics and textiles together, like in the third image, we're creating a hybrid product that is making the situation much worse, because it's going to be very difficult to even identify all the electronic components and to separate them and recycle them. And as Martin already said, the WEEE directive at the moment doesn't cover wearable tech, because it really sits between two different categories of electronic consumer goods and textiles. So it's very difficult to make companies take responsibility for their products at the moment. So these images just show you a little bit more in detail what are these textile-based wearable technologies, or e-textiles. And there's so many different ways of integrating and embedding these electronics into textiles. And what's most concerning is really the way that they're embedded is often permanent and seamless, and we can't even see them. And in terms of innovation, it's all amazing and it looks really good, and everyone's very excited about embedding electronics invisibly. But obviously at end of life, it's totally impossible to find or disassemble the components so they can be reused and recycled. And also we've got new innovations that are blended together at nanoscale, so it would be totally impossible to the naked eye to even find these elements. But I think as designers and creative entrepreneurs that we are, we can address these challenges and really turn them into opportunities. So over the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to take you to through three concepts which sort of helped me get inspired about designing wearable tech in a more sustainable manner. And so I get really inspired by looking at design principles and strategies for circularity. And Martin's already talked about this in his slides, where we're looking at biological and technical components. And so the first concept that I was looking at was the idea of reuse and repair. So in this concept is really designed to appeal to a consumer who likes customizing products. And consumers could be involved in actually creating them through simple DIY manufacture, such as 3D printing, or using 3D printing pens, like in image 26, or just the bare conductive paint that you can see there. So we could actually become, you know, designers of these products as consumers and get involved. And also products should be repaired and upgraded with new technical elements, and you can see this in image 30 just sort of as a consumer, we should be able to upgrade our wearable tech and repair it quite easily ourselves. And the next concept really looks at designing wearable tech that can sort of function as a natural extension of the wearer's skin and body. And I love the example image 36. This is the material that's actually created from the same material as condoms. So it doesn't look like it. It actually looks very sort of performancey and sporty, but there's all these amazing new non-woven materials coming through. And I think we really need to start considering what is a material and what kind of textiles can we utilize in our wearable tech. So all these materials should be designed to be firstly reusable and then recyclable. And what's really important in this story is to keep them to monomaterials, so we're not mixing, let's say, a cotton and a polyester. We need to keep things simple so we can disassemble them and then reuse or remanufacture the components. So disassembly is really important when you put things together. And we do have a couple of sort of new technologies coming through for disassembly and clothing. The most interesting one is called Wear 2 in image 33, which uses a microwave textile disassembly system to actually take all the components apart and reuse them or remanufacture them. And then if we look at biodegradability, this is actually really interesting because you wouldn't naturally think of, you know, biodegradability as a wearable tech story, but we have some really amazing sensors from the medical field already coming through. And the image on the left, image 37, this is actually a transient electronic which can dissolve at a prescribed time. So this comes from the medical sector. But these kind of ideas should really inform our wearable tech design as well, looking at things that can dissolve naturally, or the sensor next to it is a wax printed paper sensor. And this can obviously biodegrade at end of life. So we need to start thinking, you know, where will our wearable techs end up at end of use or end of life? And if they can't be repaired or recycled, you know, can we come up with more biodegradable approaches, especially if they're short-term products. Martin was talking about this as well, because some of these products are only meant to be used for a short period of time. And also what's important in this sort of approach is looking at new manufacturing technologies like 3D or spray nozzle printing. And you can see examples in image 39 and 42. So we could actually spray our wearable materials directly on the body. And the material by Tummy Care in image 42, this is sprayed through a machine, and it's a combination of rubber and cotton, and it creates a really nice sort of textile-like material. So yeah, so this is really was just a quick overview of some of the ideas that you could incorporate in line with designing for circularity, and I hope it's given you some kind of ideas for your own products and projects. So that's it from me for now.
Thank you so much, Anne. So everyone, if you can raise your hand, hopefully that's obvious in your in the GoTo meeting. So I can see already a raised hand from Ashley Phillips. Ashley, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
Hi.
Hi, Ashley. Hi. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I work for a mental health charity, and we have a lot of clothing that gets donated to us, and we've got a warehouse and volunteers, and a lot of the clothing doesn't get sold on eBay, but we want to upcycle it and slice it up and make it funky and put it back together again. And potentially we had the idea of actually having a piece of software that would help other charities or our charity or other users to have some kind of way of assessing all the different clothing, and to be able to, maybe through a piece of software, help people chop and change and know how to make interesting and funky objects, but using what we've already got. Is that something that might be feasible under the Wear Sustain proposals? Hello?
Hi. I think we'd probably need to hear a little bit more about the sort of technical aspects of that, and that might be something we could maybe discuss on another, perhaps we could have a follow-up call on that, perhaps.
Okay.
I'm not sure that the speakers could sort of help with that query at the moment, if you don't mind. So would you mind getting in touch with us afterwards and we can discuss that?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, thanks. Estelle, you've got a question, Estelle? Have you got a question for the speakers?
Actually, no, it was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? I don't think I can see any. Okay, so if there are no other questions at the moment. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions on the chat. One was,
Okay.
does Tyvek qualify from Desiree Wabasi? But I'm not sure if that is for the company or not. So if it is, so I will unmute you, Desiree, if you want to check the question.
Yes, you are talking about plastics and role in sustainability. So Tyvek, which is a sort of plastic that is also used sometimes as textile, does it qualify as a sustainable material?
Did you say Tyvek?
Tyvek, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what I'd call a biosynthetic paper. It's really a paper, a type of paper, and it can be recycled. So it depends on your sustainability strategy. So if you're looking at, let's say, looking at using biodegradable or recyclable, then Tyvek could very well be a sustainable material, because if you have a recycling strategy in place, that would satisfy the sustainability criteria. So a lot of people have worked with Tyvek in the past. You just have to make sure that if you have a product that uses Tyvek, that the user knows where to hand it in and how to recycle it. So it's not just good enough to say, yeah, it's recyclable. You need to give your customer the option to return it, either to you or to someone else who can then, sort it for recycling.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
I think we had one more question from Diletta Caporale. Is the future of wearables suitable for mass fashion production or only for a niche like haute couture?
I think that's quite a general question, isn't it? Because I mean, it depends on the product, and if you're looking at all the new. Sorry, is that someone asking the question again?
Yeah, it was Diletta asking the question, but we can't really hear you well.
Okay, sorry. You want me to answer it or?
Did I unmute you again because we cannot understand? We don't know if you're talking to us. So I think maybe Anne, if you want to answer the question then that was put in the chat, if the future of wearables is suitable for mass fashion production or only for a niche like haute couture.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're looking at wearable tech, we're looking at, let's say, activity trackers. They're already mass production, so you have to look at the different product categories. There's obviously things like we've all seen the tweeting dress or the LED high couture fashion. There's so many different aspects of wearable tech, so you can't really answer that question with one answer. It depends what kind of product you're looking at, what kind of technology. But yes, we have seen mass market wearable tech in activity trackers. So, you know, it really depends on the kind of product. So maybe the person who asked the question, if they have a particular product in mind, we could go into more detail.
Okay. We had one other raised hand from Estelle West. So Estelle, I've unmuted you if you're going to ask your question.
Actually, no, I'm sorry. It keeps
Sorry.
Oh, okay, you keep on pushing the button.
happening to me. I didn't raise my hand.
Okay, no problem. We can keep seeing it here in the chat window.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions for now, we should have time at the end for further questions. So if Susan Cozell is ready, if you could unmute yourself and then. Susan, are you ready?
Susan, you have to unmute yourself because we cannot unmute you. Yeah.
Oh, I think it's working now. Hello?
Yes.
Hello, you're very quiet.
Very faint.
I'm very faint. Okay. Can you hear me?
Just.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm talking quite loudly. Is there a
Okay, that's
tip on-
better.
Is this better? Okay, I'm just having
Yeah.
to sit really close to my computer. I'm almost wearing it. I don't have slides. Would it be preferable for me to show the webcam, show my face, or what would you prefer?
It's totally your choice.
Okay, actually, I might set the. How do I do this? Webcam. Share my webcam.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Hi.
Great. We
Okay.
can see you. Thanks.
Good. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ethics, and I thought it was useful to actually have a face so that I could emphasize that I'm a person with a body using technology to talk to you about people with bodies using technologies. Can you hear me all right? Lucy, can you give me a sign?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear now. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk to you about some critical and ethical issues in general around data collection, big data, privacy, surveillance, and even a bit of cloud and data storage issues. Now, I'm not going to give you specific solutions, but I think that this should be part of your design process. I will say a bit of history here, and you may identify with this, so it might not be history, it might be present, which is that ethics can be seen as a box to tick, or more so as a category to avoid. Designers often want to stay under the radar and not have a project flagged as an ethical risk, because it usually means a lot of extra work, or at least that used to be the attitude. It was considered distracting, annoying, and time-consuming. But more so, the ethical processes were often considered irrelevant. And I'm speaking from being involved on and off in wearables for about 20 years now. We used to avoid ethics if we weren't dealing with anything under the skin. Ethics at that time was deemed to be for more biomedical research. We also avoided ethics if we weren't dealing with what was obviously considered a vulnerable group of people, children, ill people, prisoners, etc. But I will say that a lot has changed, in particular since 2013. The notion of the body has changed, I will say that, and the notion of vulnerability has changed. In 2013, Edward Snowden's revelations rocketed across the globe regarding the extent of data capture, storage, and manipulation, all without the process of obtaining consent. So my first point will be a general contextual point, and the way to describe the context that we're living in at the moment is the capture all context. If you can capture it, do capture it. Capture it without consent, capture it as a business model. Now, what I propose to you as designers who are thinking about issues relating to sustainability and ethics is to treat this as a sort of design problem. And I don't mean problem in the sense of a headache. I mean a challenge that could actually involve your creative talents as a human being and as a designer. Part of the capture-all culture is recognizing that there's a progression. It isn't just, do we capture, do we not capture? There are various stages to this. A lot of you will work with sensors, so I will say that sensing and tracking are often the first stage of the capture process. Then there's a question of whether to store or not. It is possible to just sense and have the data streamed or not streamed and just have it effectively evaporate. When you move from sensing to tracking, you're adding a level of metadata tagging, of geolocation, and of the possibility to identify identity. Then after sensing, there's tracking, and after tracking, there's storing. You have a choice of whether to store the data or not. And for how long? Would you store it until your servers are full, like a lot of CCTV systems, and then have it be rewritten with the next batch of data? Or do you store it onto cloud server backup farms? Do you store it for 30 days? Would you store it indefinitely? It's a very significant question. After that, there's the question of tagging and the identification and the indication of metadata or not. Metadata can be time and place, location, IP address, language, and in fact, body identifiers that certain systems may have. Following this in levels of sophistication and troubling levels from an ethical perspective, we would have analytics. So the possibility to analyze data to detect patterns and preferences. Now, this, of course, is entirely how online advertising and commerce is constructed. As we know, this is what supports and funds all of our so-called free social media. From there, there's only one step from existing analytics to predictive analytics. Predictive analytics are processes of algorithmically understanding data in order to attempt to explain what you or anyone might do next. So this is when it might become a bit sci-fi, but it's actually happening right now. The sense of who might be about to commit a crime, the sense of who might be about to buy something really significant online. So this is the general context of capture all, and they're the various stages: sensing, tracking, storing, tagging, analytics, and predictive analytics. The next category I want to invite you to consider is whose bodies you're dealing with. Because wearable technologies, largely for the fashion industry, but also for health, for industry, for medical processes, are always dealing with bodies. Bodies are at the center. Do you have a sense exactly of whose bodies you're dealing with? And of course, I'd be curious to know whether any of you are dealing specifically with children or elderly people, or people who notably may require a certain added level of consent by legal processes. So they might need a guardian, they might need a carer. But even if you're designing for the mid-range, so between a child and an older person, people who might not be legally protected in the most broad strokes way, I would say that your design might implicitly have an age associated with it, a lifestyle, a gender perhaps, a state of health. There was a reference a moment ago to fitness or not. And it might also have geographical or implications in terms of income bracket or even race or ethnicity. So it's worthwhile to have a look at your design proposal and to just see whether there are what I would call hidden assumptions. Now, this isn't to imply that designers are, wicked people who want to hide things from each other, from the general public. It does mean that when we're in the process of creating something, we often have assumptions that we might not even quite be aware of. And they actually are just, they underpin what we're doing. One of the assumptions I like to look at is whether there's a desire level behind what we're doing. Do we imply that people really do want to take delight in what it is that we're designing? Or do we design for people who are actually feeling a little bit insecure and a little bit worried and might actually need protection on some level? So this emotional or affective state is an assumption that I would say underpins almost every technological device in the marketplace at the moment. So this motivating message or emotional bias, whether it's celebration or caution, is something that may, if you're aware of it, it may actually help to enrich and deepen your design process. Or it may actually cause you to stop and rethink. Now, what I want to suggest is that ethics at the moment is not just something to be avoided, or ethics are not something to be avoided, but ethics is actually based around respect and agency and choice. And some interaction designers I work with will actually refer to this as care. So another word for sustainability is actually, a care for the environment, a care for what it is that you're creating and where it's going to go next. Ethics is just an extension of this care. I will say, however, that a lot of ethical paradigms that you might download through the internet that might come from disciplines such as medicine or such as social work, anthropology, ethnography, you may read the procedures that people have implemented and you may actually think that they're not quite appropriate for what you're doing. I would encourage you to do some research and actually think about what might be an appropriate ethical paradigm, because we're not just designing devices and products, we are actually designing the way we relate to one another, the way bodies relate to other bodies. And if you actually take this with a bit of breathing space, instead of feeling like it's a huge burden, you can contribute tremendously, not just to the next device, perhaps greater protection of the planet, but you can actually shift the culture of the way we engage with each other through technologies. A few points before I end here. I will say, even if your product is not specifically designed for children, there may actually be the likelihood of children picking it up. So for example, if it's a device that ends up in somebody's home, it may be picked up, it may be used, it may end up in the hands of people who you haven't explicitly designed for. That's worth considering. As I've said before, don't assume that previous ethical templates will work for you, but don't also assume this means that you can avoid the ethics issue entirely. What is acceptable now? This is a very important point. What is acceptable now in terms of ethics may not actually be acceptable in a year's time or 2 years' time. So this relates to consent forms. You may be working with an ethics advisor. You may actually need people to sign consent forms. You will know just through having a device that you're constantly having to agree to new terms and conditions. This is something we just do. Often we just tick the box. We don't even think much about it. Ethics needs to be revisited as the climate changes, as the devices change, as the politics change. So be prepared if you're actually working with ethics to revisit it. Be prepared and not alarmed if you might actually have to invite someone to reconsider their ethical options in the space of a year or so. Finally, as we move on, just one point to expand upon that. Revisiting ethical consent actually allows for a very, very human process of learning and understanding more as we go along. We're at a really challenging and also exciting time at the moment where things are changing so rapidly that we struggle just to keep on top of it as designers. But we also struggle to really understand what is happening. So don't think that it's an incredible burden to have to keep revisiting ethical consent, but instead allow for it as being a learning process. If someone is going to live with you and with your products over a longer period of time, you can actually create a relationship with them that might actually mean discussing the wider context within which your work will exist. So practical discussion points include questioning why it is necessary to collect data by your design, your prototype. Is it necessary to collect data? There tends to be one of these implicit assumptions that if there's data to be had, that it should be collected. I think that as designers, we can actually question that. we can be investigating alternatives to data collection. And we can also be experimenting playfully with what is called obfuscation strategies. Obfuscation strategies include firewalls, of course. They include encryption and what that might mean. It also includes playing with ambiguity of data, data collection, and then data, what might it be? Data deletion or data evaporation. It could also be data inundation. Standardly, there are two ways to avoid being tracked by data. One is to actually encrypt and to create barriers between yourself and your data collection, like firewalls, GPG, etc. The other is to submit so much data that the processes of algorithmically determining what's happening might actually be confused by data inundation. It can be a playful way to do things. Now, this relates also to business models. You're probably aware that the business model of most small startups in recent, I'd say, 5 years or so, has been to collect data and to feed these data archives into the eventual possibility of a desirable buyout. So I would ask you, if you're in the WARE project, if you're interested in ethics and sustainability, do you necessarily want to fall into this business model? Or do you perhaps want to devote some creative thought to what an alternative business model might actually look like? Maybe it will be about encryption, maybe it will be about the playful distortion of data, or the non-collection of data. Thinking sustainably, don't feel that storing things on the cloud is a sustainable option. I recently heard a talk by a media and communications scholar, Wendy Chun, who held up a piece of paper and said this printing things out is actually, in the long run, more environmentally sustainable than any number of megabytes in the cloud, because of the cooling process for server farms. And then, of course, there's the process of anonymization. And really, if you're using anonymization protocols and practices, actually spend some time looking into them, because a lot of software that might claim to scrub data or to anonymize will actually keep at a basis level the most identity tagging lines possible. So they may anonymize a lot of the metadata, but the anonymization process may only go so far, and it may actually be built around a kernel of very specific identification of IP address, or even personal identity in some way. So I'll end my small talk there, and I want it to be a sort of optimistic is the wrong word, but I don't want you to feel that ethics necessarily involves a dampening or a deadening of your creative possibilities as designers. I actually think that as we move forward, the ethical side of things relates as much to the bodies and technologies as what the devices are actually doing with our bodily data in a creative way. So I'll leave it there, and I'll be open to questions or follow-up if you like.
Thank you so much, Susan. Do we have any questions? You've obviously been so thorough that we don't currently have any questions. Perhaps we could open the floor. Pardon?
Clearly, it's something that I'm thinking.
Yeah. Thank you. I have a question from Jessica Smarsh. So I'll unmute you, Jessica.
Yeah, well, actually, I typed it in the box, but
okay.
I just was wondering, in your list of capture all culture steps, at which point do we sort of cross the border from, being ethical, sensing, tracking, storing, and then, at what point do we cross from being ethical to unethical? Can it happen at every level, or is it like, just when we start to get to the predictive analytics that we really cross into that?
It's such a good question, and I think it shifts project to project, and it might even shift person to person. Depends on what you're sensing. I recently worked on a project where we were working with emotional qualities, and just the fact of pointing to emotional qualities while using a mobile phone network started to feel a little bit risky for me. That's almost at the step one or step two. Definitely, I think predictive analytics freaks out most people. It's just the sense of, don't tell me what I'm going to do before I do it. But I have a feeling that it depends on really what data you're capturing and what you're intending to do with it. So you could ask yourself these questions at every stage.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
We have one coming up from Mare Baalman. So Mare, I'll unmute you. You can ask your question then.
Hello. I was just wondering if you have any, because you talked a lot about the data and not so much about the algorithms that are performed on the data. I mean, because one of the big problems I think that is there is that we don't know what these algorithms are. They're all black boxes.
Yep.
So I don't know, and to my sense, it seems actually learning more about what these algorithms do and how they work, how they perform is an important issue to explore.
Absolutely, yeah. Machine learning, Internet of Things. I mean, any moment that we have to try and we can't always open the black box, but we can try and infer. And if you look at what the goals might be, so for example, encouraging people to buy more or to use more, it's clear that there are algorithms that might infer desire patterns. You know, where people shop, what time of the day they're likely to shop, even cyclical in terms of seasonal purchasing. So I have a feeling that we can assume that algorithms are there to try to unpack almost all aspects of human behavior. Like everything is fair game if you can attempt to algorithmize it, which is why I find myself quite interested in what might be considered ambiguity. And I know people who work in the crypto culture will do simple things like in the London Underground, they'll have an Oyster card swap. So instead of having the Oyster card tagged to the credit card, they'll actually try and use a pay-as-you-go Oyster card, and then there'll be communities of people who will just swap them, share them, so that, you know, for a week my movements in central London will be tracked, and then on the same card you might have someone else's, so that you can't actually create meaning out of the data. So that's part of the really interesting array of obfuscation strategies that are out there. But if you have a way of cracking into and inferring or revealing what the algorithms are, then that's great.
Yeah, well, I'm more thinking of exploring actually working, like designing these kind of algorithms, or looking at types of algorithms that are used in these systems and exploring them in an artistic way to see how they perform, like what they actually do. Yeah, to see that as a way to understand what is going on there.
Do bear in mind, though, that your creative and artistic outputs can actually be used to increase the effectiveness of the wider spread algorithmic surveillance of people. So even when you're doing this, you know, find a way to allow for your work not to just be added to the big machine of data forensics that are out there.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the same with sensors that are also used in both ways. I mean, with all sort of technological arts, yeah, there's always this contingency to military uses and other uses.
It's not just military, but actually you're bringing up a good point, which is in terms of ethics. We tend to think that the ethics is what we're asking our users to agree to, but there's obviously the ethics that we're operating under according to our own self, you know, as what are our design ethics? It's a good question. As designers, you have an ethical code of conduct, and does it change over time? Does it change project to project?
All right, thanks.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jessica, did you have an additional question?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, Jessica Smart. I saw a raised hand again, so I was running.
Oh, was it up again? Well, actually, I didn't mean to, but I did have another question come to mind, which was a follow-up from the other question. Because if you analyze in your own project every stage and ask yourself, you know, how am I using this data? Is it ethical or not? It's also like, who's answering that question? Am I answering it based on my own values? Or
maybe, or you're working with your collaborators, or if it's a particularly sticky issue, you might need to create a focus group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, a focus group, you have maybe still 10 people. So, yeah, like how far reaching does that have to go?
It's what you feel. I mean, it's the stage of the process, and you can open it out as wide as you think it needs to be opened out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Or have somebody who might act as an ethical consultant or an ethical provocateur, for example, for a design process. Someone who you trust, who could just come in and ask you the difficult questions, and you know, you might hate and love it at the same time, but they'll you know, possibly move you in a different direction, or at least help you affirm that some of your internal guidance was sound all along. We're all figuring this out as we go along, and I think that we have a community of what's Donald Schoen's term, a community of reflective practitioners.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
So no more other questions. So back to you, Lucy.
Yes, so I mean, the floor's kind of open now for any other questions to any of our speakers. Or we have 4 more minutes, so if any of the speakers had anything else that they wanted to add, having heard from everyone, now's your time. I'm guessing maybe not.
Oh, sorry, it's Anna here.
Anne, hi.
No, I haven't. Well, there's obviously a lot to think about for everyone, I think. So, you know, I'm happy to answer any more questions if there are any, but I haven't got any myself or any additions.
Okay, thank you. Martin, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Okay, so if no one else has anything else to add at this point, do feel free to interrupt me if you do. Hello? Hi, is that Martin? No, okay. Okay, well, Johnny, I think we'll probably bring the webinar to a close now. Thank you so much to Martin, Anne and Susan for sharing their invaluable knowledge with us. Thank you also for all the participants for your contributions. This is being recorded and will be available on the website. Obviously, come back to us. You can use the info@wearsustain.eu email address if you've got any questions. And do see the website for details on our other webinars. There's one on arts and technology collaborations, and there's another on IP and legal considerations for Wear applicants. So have a look on the website, and please do join them if possible. So if there's nothing else, I'll just say thank you very much and goodbye.